licensed marriage and family therapist, your life and relationship strategist. I'm joined today by my mother, and I am honored that she's here because it's very vulnerable to be live on the internet and to put your story out there. So I'm grateful to my mom, Bonnie. Thank you so much for being here today, where we're going to talk about mother-daughter relationships. So we're going to kind of jump right into it, and the goal for today is to talk about some really kind of high conflict, difficult topics. And we haven't really discussed this much ahead of time. We went through just kind of a couple points, but as much as possible, I wanted this to be candid so you could just kind of see how we're working through our stuff one day at a time. So welcome, Bonnie.
And it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you, Dawn, and with the rest of you out there. So I hope that our journey together can help you.
That's my hope as well. So let's dig in. So let's talk about expectations. I know that in our relationship, a lot of times expectations have gotten in the way, meaning I had an expectation that you should be a perfect mom, or that you should, like the things that I like, or want to attend the things that I want to attend. What is your experience about how expectations of each other has kind of damaged the relationship, and how people can work through that?
I think that expectations are a big part of both sides, the mother, the daughter, the child, the parent. Because as parents, I know the way I was raised was I was to be respectful and obedient, and so it was important for me to know that your teachers could tell me that you were being respectful and obedient. So there was probably a lot of expectations put on you that you were to be
a good girl.
A good girl. And so there was other things with conflict that I didn't really know how to handle. So how can I tell you how to handle them? You can't always be good when you're having healthy boundaries, right?
So you mentioned something in there that you grew up with the idea of raising a daughter that's good. We were raised in very, very different environments.
Yes,
You were raised we were both raised in small towns, but yours was a pretty tightly religious and close ethnic community, a farming town. And I was raised in a much more liberal environment with a lot of different influences. Do you think that that has had a huge impact? And what would you say about other families out there who have a difficult time kind of navigating different belief systems, different ideals, because we grew up two different ways?
Yeah, I think it was the time frame and it was the culture differences, but I also think that it was the here and now that you grew up in. Things had gotten much more liberal than where I don't think it would have mattered as much where you grew up, because you're going to have those influences wherever you go, and that's a big challenge for parents today. Is as you want your children to have certain integrity, to be able to counteract what might not be out there, and so that was a struggle. It definitely was, and I don't think as a parent I was quite aware of how different it was for you as it was for me. I don't think I really comprehended that.
That's a wonderful point. I'm so glad that you're saying, because I think a lot of times the parents that I work with, they don't realize how different it is. And I know that there's a book out there that's actually considered kind of old these days, but it's Queen Bees and Wannabes. And it's a book for parents raising daughters. And in there, it really articulates the importance of knowing what your daughters are doing, knowing what they're doing on the internet, knowing who their friends are, being really, really involved. And I know that you and Dad you put a priority on that.
Oh, yeah.
But really understanding what's happening so that you can be a helpful influence is really key.
Well, and then there's the other part. You want your child to be able to gain independence slowly and make their own decisions, but then also you want there to be some boundaries that are healthy. And if you don't really know what's going on, you can't really explain to the child why you're making the decisions that you're making, because you don't really know.
Is that one of those times where it's because I said so?
Exactly.
Okay. So can we talk about a kind of really difficult topic, I think, for most parents, mothers and daughters especially, which is what about when your child is doing something that you just don't agree with. So, for instance, let's say your child is dating someone that you just absolutely cannot tolerate, or let's say they're making a decision about a job or a place to live or just their lifestyle or something that is completely outside of your personal belief system. How do you navigate that as a parent without completely damaging the relationship? Now, I'm going to add a caveat there that Mom and I have damaged our relationship plenty over the decades, and this exact issue has gotten in the way of our relationship plenty of times. But I'd like for us to be able to share with you how we've kind of overcome it. So, what do you do when you just can't agree?
Well, it's one of those things where if you're still the parent and the child's in your home, I mean, I don't know what you're going to do nowadays, but my sense was it was my responsibility to keep you safe. And and so there were times that I know I said no, absolutely not. And there were times where I just let it take its course and I prayed because I know that we have to have a certain amount of faith and trust that children learn by their mistakes, just like I did. I learned by my mistakes, and you have to let children make a certain amount of mistakes. And it's so hard to know when to say no and when to let it all unravel and let them learn.
I think that's one of the most valuable things we can reinforce for those of you that are watching this is that it's okay to not always know when to let go and when to set a limit, because there's no two mothers and daughters that are the same. There's no two set of circumstances that are going to be identical, and there's no person out there that can tell you exactly how to parent. And so it's really okay to make mistakes, and it may create conflict, and it may cause, a break in the relationship for a period of time. I think the most important thing for you guys to keep in mind is as long as you keep coming back to the table with some unconditional love and a willingness to forgive and accept each other's flaws, that even if you don't know the right answer and even if you make a mistake, that's okay, because none of us, not parent, we're both parents actually, or child, can get it perfect. And so cut your kids some slack and cut your parents some slack, regardless of the age. I think that's a really excellent point.
And not to be afraid. I think that there's so much tension in wanting to always be close with your child as a parent. I don't. It might go both ways, but I moved away from my family when I was 30ish, and so I've always kind of been independent, and that wasn't a big deal. But I think that there's a certain desire for parents and children to be close
Best
together.
friends.
Yeah, especially with parents, and to give each other space when we're having trouble dealing with the relational issues. Just letting go and letting. I'm not saying pushing them away forever. I'm saying let the maturity process happen for both of you.
So let me cut through all of this. What she's saying is there have been times in our relationship where we have not spoken to each other, like years, not years together, but separate times we have gone maybe for a period of a year without speaking. I think that's what you're
Well,
referring
no,
to.
we spoke, but it was not. It was just business.
And
I knew she was alive and that she was okay.
so there have been times where our relationship wasn't close. We certainly weren't best friends, and we've managed to navigate through that. And what I hear you saying is that it's okay to trust the process,
Yeah.
even if we're not speaking or we're not close right now. And actually, as a relationship guideline, not that I'm advocating for there to be those kind of breaks in relationships. Again, I think every relationship is unique, but there are periods of time in any relationship where there's periods of closeness and periods of distance. And that includes marriages, that includes with our children or our parents or friends. And so part of our, I think, mission in life is to get okay with the uncertainty in the distance. And the more we can get okay with that uncertainty, the more that we're not going to be trying to control the person that we want to be in a relationship with. And it's not so scary to let go a little bit. So I hope that's making sense or landing.
And from a parent perspective, I have to say that those times where we weren't really having any relationship, that was a hard thing for me. I don't want it to sound like it's no big deal. My heart desperately wanted to be able to work on it, to be closer, to get these things ironed out. But my head told me, you gotta leave it alone. You gotta leave it alone. You gotta trust. You gotta trust. You gotta leave it alone. And so it's mom and dad. It's hard. It is really, really hard. But I think the fruit of it was positive. Do you agree?
Two things that pop out to me. Number one, for you to say it was hard. That's really important because I think that I was really focused on it was hard for me. You know, what my mom was doing that wasn't fair, and I was really stuck in that kind of egocentric place about how you left me. And so it's important to consider the other person's position. I'm seeing a lot going on in the chat box, so I don't want to miss that. But then there was a second thing that you said. Mom and Dad, it's really hard. Oh, the points in my life where mom, where I call it she walked away, so I might reframe that for myself now, where there was distance between us, those were the times where I actually had the courage to find my own answers for life instead of leaning on her answers, because I was so afraid if I had my own answers, she would reject me. So my fear of rejection kind of drove me to continue to want to please her by doing or saying or believing or thinking or feeling how she did. And in those periods of distance is where I found myself. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Let me check the chat box. So what is a way to reconnect after a period of emotional distance? And is one question. And another question is, how do you deal with a relationship where you want to be close, but there's a lot of conflict? And any relationship turns into a conflict or a full-blown fight. So let's deal with the first one. How do we reconnect after a period of emotional distance? That's a good question. How have we done it? I had a baby. That helped.
Well, even before that, I sensed that you were wanting to have a relationship again. Even before that, that baby certainly helped.
Yes. So my answer to that would be, I think I started taking responsibility for my own side of the street. I think I started realizing that that fear of rejection was leading me to be dishonest with her, which was causing distance in our relationship. I think I became willing to say I'm sorry. I became willing to say how are you. I became willing to be myself without being terrified. And so how can I have a relationship with her if everything I think, feel, and believe I'm like keeping secret because I'm afraid to hear what she says? So I had to like be willing to say, this is who I am, this is how I feel, and not for nothing, it did matter. I did care what she thought, but like in the scope of life, I can't care what you think more than what I think.
And to realize that I still love you. I think that there's our own personal stuff is all wound up in it, that we expect rejection. Those little things in our head say, you're rejected, you're rejected, you're rejected, and they don't hear the messages of, she loves me, she loves me.
And so this all kind of goes together because the rejection and the distance and the disagreement are kind of a perfect storm for the belief that my mother should love me, should be close. These are ideals that were kind of socially woven in, right?
Yeah.
Like we should be close, we should love each other, we should like each other even, we should want to be best friends. And those things weren't true for us, and so then you have the rejection and the distance, and it's all just kind of the perfect storm for saying, well, she must not love me. And that's not really true, because disagreement does not mean I don't love or care. So that's important. So I think, you know, to be able to reconnect, it really takes a willingness to see the other person's point of view and perspective and to listen and to be willing to show up for yourself and to not be so afraid of rejection, to like have the courage to work inside of the relationship. What do you think?
Yeah, and as your child begins to reach back out to you or the other way around, don't make a big deal about the past. Just move on.
That's a good point.
Don't make a big deal out of it. Just go with the flow.
That's a good point. A lot of times people want, you know,
Payback.
Right. They want their apology. We talked about that last week. They want their apology and they want someone to acknowledge that they're right. And so, yeah, if you can let go of that, that's really important.
Move on.
Yeah. So the second question we got was, how do you deal with a relationship when you want to be close but there's high conflict? And that's interesting. I think that you and I we're kind of working inside of that now. In the past, when it was high conflict, I think we would just take a time out in our relationship. And I think now there are certainly topics that are high conflict for you and I, because we do have very strikingly different beliefs on certain topics, very aligned beliefs in other places. My mom is a huge influence in who I am today and how I show up wanting to change the world and making it a different place. My belief in mind, body, spirit connection, holistic well-being, that is all about what my mom taught me and what she believed and how she's practiced that in her life. But there are certainly places where we've kind of gone polar opposites, and I think we just kind of leave those things alone.
Well, can I just address something that just happened back in the kitchen?
Sure.
Are you okay with that?
Oh,
Let's see how
Okay.
let's see how candid we can get. So, Precious grandbaby is just turned 2 a few months ago, and so we say
yes.
table prayers at
Yes.
home. And so I said to Dawn, I asked permission. I said, would it be okay to say thank you, God, for the food? And you said, and I sensed defensiveness immediately. And it's not what it's about with me. I'm just asking. And if you say no, I'm okay. And so I want us to be able to talk about those things without you thinking I'm rejecting you.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it takes two people being willing to not take things personally.
Exactly.
So if you are in a relationship with a parent or a child where one of those people is not willing to work with that, or they consistently take things personally, do you think it's workable?
Because one or the other is going to shut down all the time. And then, I mean, having a relationship where you can trust one another means intimacy and means being able to express who you are without shutting down. And that takes practice. That doesn't happen overnight. It's taken me a lifetime to learn that.
That's what I always say, it takes practice. That's an awesome example. I'm so glad you brought it up. Totally candid. That literally happened like 2 hours ago. So,
And you're okay with that, right?
oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I felt. I don't know if my defensiveness was as much. It's interesting because we're getting into assumptions, right? Where you're reading each other and you can sense something, but you don't necessarily know exactly what it was. So I don't know if it was so much about defensiveness that I thought you were overstepping. I actually felt pretty good that you were asking. I think I am more in my own struggle about how to teach my daughter about the concept of God, and so that was probably my own stuff about. I felt like we were putting the cart before the horse, and I don't feel like I've gotten there with.
And that's totally fine.
So
we
I think that was
don't go
less
there.
about us and more about my process, but so anyway.
Yeah, but it's good to be able to talk about it because
Yeah, and ask each other.
I'm not going to feel rejected.
That's new for us, though. So I see another question in the chat box. Is there such thing as being too close? Let's say a young kid who's overly attached to the mother, to the point where the mom or the parent is the only social interaction. Is that healthy? I don't want to be judgmental here, but from a clinical perspective, as a therapist, I would say no, that's not healthy. Because it's really important, number one, for kids to have a broad range of social interactions, but it's also really important for both the parent's self-esteem and the child's self-esteem, these are my 2 cents, for them to both have other sources of esteem rather than validation from the other. And so that's really the dynamic that gets set up when a parent and a child are what we would call in the therapy realm enmeshed, or too close, as the person who asked is indicating. The issue is that self-esteem becomes derived from your child's validation or from your parent's validation, instead of learning, kind of what I was describing earlier in the periods of absence from my mom, is where I really learned how to find my own identity and my own sense of self-worth. So that's really, from my perspective, the damage that gets done when a parent and child are too close. What would you say?
Well, right, because we need to learn about how to deal with relationships, and the more we experience at the right age, the better we can function. I think also what happens then is the parent tries really hard to keep the child from failing, and failing is a wonderful thing, as Apple says. Failing is what brought them to all of those great discoveries and great product, and we need to, with healthy boundaries, let our kids fail.
I love that. There are two people also that I admire that say that. Brene Brown talks about not needing to raise a generation of perfect children, but to be able to raise kids that have emotional resiliency. And the CEO of Spanx, I wish I could remember her name, she was raised where her father at the dinner table would literally every night have her and her brother share something that they messed up. And their oops for the day. And she said that the failure became not the mistake that they made, but the failure became not trying. And so yeah, it's a totally different way to raise kids rather than trying to raise perfect children, to raise imperfect children that can embrace their imperfection and are willing to get in the ring.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And your kid doesn't have to please the world.
Yeah.
Right. I wish I'd known that.
Me too. But that's okay. I figured it out. So is there anything that you think stands out to you that we've missed today, or anybody else that has questions that might be watching live? We'd love to answer any questions that you have for us about how we might have navigated something. I think we've taken on some pretty big
I think we did great.
topics.
I think that we've woven through those, and we should let well enough alone.
Okay, so just to recap, some of the things that I think we talked about today are acceptance of each other, tolerance, forgiveness, being willing to kind of let go and move on, letting go of the fear of rejection, accepting when there's distance in a relationship and getting okay with that, being able to kind of navigate with each other and not get hostile or defensive.
Trust the letting go process.
Trust the letting go. Absolutely.
Trust the letting go.
So I see one more question in the chat box. In my experience working with families, have I seen relationships that can't be fixed? Situations where maybe the family environment is toxic and it's better to walk away. Well, that's a really tough question and a really good question. There are unfortunately toxic situations where there is not an immediate solution at that point in time. And so I'm not a fortune teller, and I never want to say beyond a shadow of a doubt this cannot be fixed, like walk away and proclaim forever and ever amen that this relationship is done. I think that it's take it one day at a time and be willing to let go, and then also be willing to notice if there's an opening at some point in the future. Even if that moment is in someone's last week of life. There are countless stories that I have heard from people through my years in support groups and in my therapy practice of hearing that, in the last days or moments of a parent's life that they got the gift that they needed from their parent in that healing of a relationship, and just some words of apology or of understanding or reconnection. So I'd say don't ever give up hope. Hope is the thing that keeps us going when we feel lost or when we feel unsure. But there are certainly times where it is toxic and it becomes damaging to our bodies and to our minds to stay kind of in that fire.
Yes.
So absolutely be willing to walk away, but also be willing to hold out hope and watch for that opening, and don't necessarily just write someone off for good and say I'm done forever. That would be sad. I would be sad if you did that. So thank you to everyone who's watching live today. If you're watching the video, thank you so much for taking the time. If anything we've said has been helpful to you, please be sure to hit a thumbs up on the video and subscribe to the channel so that you can get notifications when there's other live shows or videos that hit the channel. I'm so grateful for all the positive feedback in the chat box today, and for those of you that have been here, you absolutely help keep me going and help let me know that the message is relevant and that it's helpful. If you are interested in therapy or getting help with your own relationships, please feel free to reach out to me. You can always drop me a line on my website, dawnwigginstherapy.com, where you can sign up for a free consult. There's all kinds of great things available to you on my website, and know that even if you're not where I am, that's okay. Web-based therapy is all the rage these days, and so I have a HIPAA compliant software that's super easy to use, and I can come to you wherever you are. So if you're ready to take your life and your relationship to that next step, just reach out. Thank you so much, Mom, for your
having me.
candor, and thank you for being willing to embrace vulnerability and put your stuff out there. I'm very grateful for the influence that you've been in my life and for
Thank you.
the role that you're playing in my journey today.
And you are my beautiful daughter, and I'm glad to be here.
Okay, before it gets too emotional, thanks everyone. Have a beautiful day.